Welcome to my channel. I'm Scott, and in this video we're going to look at Meta's first quarter earnings. So they knocked it out of the park. They beat revenue and earnings. Subscribers are up, yet the stock went down. I think at the peak after hours when they released earnings, it was down about 17-18%. When the market opened, it was down around 11%. I'm not that surprised it went down because the stock is getting really high, and the higher stock gets, the more it's perceived that it's overvalued. And it's also the best performing stock in the S&P this year. So you can't blame people for taking in their profits, especially if you're up 100-200%. My Meta from 2017 is up 250%. But I'm long term. I'm holding till retirement. If the ship crashes and sinks, I'm going to go down with the ship. That's how much faith I have in the company. But let's go through their numbers. First, we'll look at their press release. Then we'll look at their presentation slides. They just put up phenomenal numbers. Their revenue in the first quarter of 2023, $29 billion. Now it's $36.5 billion, up 27%. It's so hard to grow revenue 27% when your base is $28 billion. If your base was $1 billion, 27% is much more achievable. Expenses up only 6%, from $21.4 billion to $22.6 billion. When expenses go up less than revenue, margins improve. You can see that right here. Operating margin 25% to an amazing 38%. Their operating income went up 91%, from $7.2 billion to $13.8 billion. Revenue went up 27%, yet profit went up 91%. The reason being is because expenses went up so much less than revenue, it exaggerates their improvement in operating income. Of course, taxes went up 14%, 1.6 to 1.8 billion. Their effective tax rate is 13%. That's down from 22%. Net income went up 117%, 5.7 to 12.3 billion. It more than doubled. Diluted EPS more than doubled, 220 to 471. One of the most important stats for a company like this is the number of users. A little less than half the world uses their platforms, 3.24 billion. Family daily active users. Family includes all their apps, namely Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. That's an increase of 7% year over year. They're still growing in all markets. Ad impressions, how they make money, went up 20% year over year. Average cost per ad also went up 6%. They spent a lot in CapEx. They're investing for the future, almost $7 billion. They did recently announce their first dividend payment, but they always buy back stock. That's the major way they reward shareholders. $15 billion of repurchases. And now $1.27 billion of dividends, their first dividend payment. They have a boatload of cash on their balance sheet, $58 billion, and they're always adding to that because free cash flow of $12.5 billion, almost 70,000 employees, that's down 10%. And a big reason the stock went down is because of the guidance. I think a big reason is it was getting overvalued, or at least it was perceived as overvalued because it went up so much. Whenever stock goes up really fast, there's always a pullback. And the pullback can last a week or two or a year or two, but then eventually goes back up to new highs. Rinse and repeat. Second quarter revenue, 36.5 to 39 billion. Full year revenue, 96 to 99 billion, up from 94 to 99 billion. That was their prior outlook. They still expect an operating loss in Reality Labs, which is fine because they make so much money in their advertising business. They can take a hit in Reality Labs until it becomes profitable. Full year CapEx spend, 35 to 40 billion. Lots of investors did not like this. That's an increase from their prior range of 30 to 37 billion because they want to continue to accelerate their AI spend. Here's their income statement. Revenue, 37 billion. Cost of revenue, all the expenses directly tied to generating revenue, 7 billion. R&D, 10 billion. Marketing, 2.5 billion. G&A, 3.5 billion. Expenses up very little from last year. Operating income up a lot. Net income up a lot, which means their EPS more than doubled. It's $4.86. So if you own one share, the earnings applied to you are $4.86. Current assets, 75 billion. Current liabilities, 28 billion. Really high current ratio, a little less than 3. Cash and marketable securities, 58 billion, down from 65 billion. Property and equipment is their biggest asset, 99 billion. Liabilities 73 billion, down from 77 billion. Their biggest liability is accrued expenses. This is when a company incurs an expense it hasn't paid yet, like bonuses for their executives. Assets minus liabilities equals equity, 150 billion of equity. They raised 75 billion from selling their business. They profited 77 billion from running their business. Their retained earnings will be much higher if they didn't buy back so much stock. Let's look at a statement of cash flow. It's operating cash flow, 19 billion, up from 14 billion. This is how much cash the company generates from running their day-to-day business. Net income is a company's accounting profit or loss. They spent 8.7 billion in their investing section, 6.5 billion of PP&E, then the purchase and sale of marketable securities. In their financing section, they spent 20 billion. They bought back 15 billion of stock, a lot higher than last year of 9 billion. They paid 1.3 billion of dividends. They didn't pay any dividends in the past. When employees get equity rewards, stock in a company, Meta has to pay taxes on that. They pay 3.2 billion of taxes, a lot more than last year. This implies they're giving a lot more stock to their employees. 99% of their revenue is advertising, which is up a lot from last year. Other revenue almost doubled from last year, 380 million. Reality Labs, their VR headsets, 440 million. And they had a loss of 3.8 billion from that segment, a little better than last year, a loss of 4 billion. Let's take a look at their first quarter presentation slides. Here's their advertising revenue by geography. This shows us the last 9 quarters. In the most current quarter, revenue of 36 billion. That's advertising revenue. It is lower than last quarter because usually the fourth quarter is the biggest for a lot of companies due to the holidays. So usually compare it to the same quarter in a prior year, and that's up a lot from 28 billion to 36 billion. US and Canada is their biggest revenue generator, 15.5 billion. It was higher last quarter, but besides last quarter, that's the highest ever in US and Canada. Europe, also the highest ever, excluding last quarter, 8.3 billion. APAC is a new record, their highest ever, including the last quarter. Same thing with rest of the world, the highest ever. This is huge. They're breaking records in the first quarter in APAC and rest of the world. Could you imagine the fourth quarter of 2024? They may hit 50 billion of revenue in that quarter alone. The next slide is total revenue by geography, which is almost identical because there's very little revenue outside of advertising. Here's their revenue the last 9 quarters. Advertising 27 billion in the first quarter of 2022. Now it's 35.6 billion. Other revenue is its highest ever in the first quarter, 380 million. Reality Labs, they were a lot higher last quarter, 1.1 billion. Also, the first quarter, second quarter, and fourth quarter of 2022 were higher than the first quarter of 2024. Hopefully, they can grow this business, or they're going to have to just cut it. Really high operating income in family of apps, 17.7 billion. That's about a 50% margin, operating profit margin, because half of 35.6 billion is 17.8 billion. Because half of 35 is 17.5, half of 6 is 3. 17.5 plus 0.3 is 17.8. But the reason their operating income is only 38% because they had a loss in Reality Labs. That brings down their total operating income to 13.8 billion. Still really good margins, a lot higher than the first quarter of 2023, but lower than the third and fourth quarter of 2023. Expenses as a percent of revenue, cost of revenue 18%. That's in line with the prior 3 quarters, but a lot better than the first quarter of 2023, it was 21%. R&D 27%, that's down from 33% last year. Marketing 7%, that's its lowest ever. And G&A 9%, lower than 10% from the first quarter of 2023, but 50% higher than the third and fourth quarter of 2023. It was only 6%. They're doing a good job at writing off things. Their tax rate is 13%. That's lower than the past 8 quarters. The lower the taxes, the more profitable the company is, the more money for the investors. Their second highest net income ever, 12.4 billion, lower than last quarter of 14 billion, but well more than double first quarter of 2023. EPS 471, their second highest ever, double the 220 from the first quarter of 2023. Their CapEx spend was 6.7 billion, a little lower than the first quarter of 2023 of 7.1 billion. And they're trimming their CapEx. It was $32 billion in all of 2022, down to $28 billion, mainly because they're not spending much in the metaverse anymore. And they're still growing. How can they still be growing when they have 3 billion daily active users? But they are. Every single quarter they grow. They're up to 3.24 billion users. Besides Google, they have the most users of any company. And their users are better than Google because when you go to Google, you don't sit on Google for more than a few minutes. You search for something, then you go to that website. It's not a destination. When you use Facebook, Instagram, that's a destination. This morning alone, I spent an hour on Facebook just reading through articles and just killing time. Their average revenue per user is $11.20. That's up from $9.47 last year, down a little from last quarter. Ad impressions are up in every location. Worldwide ad impressions are up 20% this quarter. It's up the most in APAC, 28%, but it was a lot higher in previous quarters. Average price per ad is up 6%. It's up the most in the rest of the world, 20%, 18% in Europe, but it's down in APAC, down 3%. The biggest revenue generator is US and Canada, that's up 5%. It seems to be going down every single quarter in APAC. That may be a concern. Operating cash flow, $19.2 billion. Higher the past 2 quarters, $20 billion was the highest ever, third quarter of 2023. Free cash flow of $12.5 billion, their second highest ever. The highest was $13.6 billion in the third quarter of 2023, but up a lot from the first quarter of 2023. So you can see they had a great first quarter, but I'm sure you heard the term, the trend is your friend. The trend can also be your worst enemy, especially if you own Meta, because the trend is going down. And when things go down, they go down fast. Same thing when they go up. I'm not saying wait to buy it, because I think in 18 months it's going to hit 600 or higher. But I think it's going to be around 380 at the bottom this quarter or next. And then it's going to shoot up again. That's just my prediction. So let me know what you think. Give the video a like, subscribe, or comment below. If you'd like to get a custom valuation or just support the channel, you can become a member by clicking on the link in the description below. Thanks for watching.